Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
Monica Quartermaine had faced many heartbreaks over the years, but the day of the funeral felt heavier than anything she had endured in a long time. The Quartermaine estate was draped in solemn silence, the kind that seemed to cling to every corner of the mansion. Family and friends had gathered to pay their respects, though as always with the Quartermaines, grief mixed with tension, whispered secrets, and unspoken rivalries. Monica had grown used to the stormy nature of her family, but nothing could have prepared her for the shocking twist that awaited her that afternoon. Just as the eulogies came to a close and the mourners began to filter toward the reception area, the front doors creaked open, and in walked a man who seemed like a ghost from another life. His very presence shifted the atmosphere in the room, causing gasps and stunned silence to ripple through the crowd. The man stood tall, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of determination and unease, as though he knew the gravity of this moment but refused to falter. Monica's breath caught in her throat. She knew those eyes. She had seen them once before, many years ago, in a painful chapter she had long since buried. It couldn't be, yet it was. The man claimed to be her lost son, the child she had thought she would never see again. His sudden appearance was like a dagger piercing through layers of carefully built composure, and Monica found herself torn between disbelief, anger, and a desperate longing she had never truly let go of. The whispers began almost instantly. Tracy, never one to hide her emotions, muttered something sharp under her breath. Ned exchanged looks with Brooke Lynn, both visibly unsettled by the intrusion. Even Michael, who had come to pay respects, tilted his head in confusion, unsure whether this was a cruel trick or a tragic revelation. Monica's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her handkerchief, trying to steady herself against the overwhelming tide of emotions. The man introduced himself in a calm yet assertive tone, explaining that he was her son and that he had every right to be there. What stunned the family even more was his next statement: he wasn't only here to pay his respects. He was here because he wanted what he claimed was rightfully his, the Quartermaine inheritance. The shock spread like wildfire. The funeral had barely concluded, and already, drama threatened to unravel into chaos. Monica, caught in the storm, felt torn between the past and the present. She had lived long enough to know that nothing ever remained buried forever, especially not in Port Charles, where secrets seemed to rise from the grave with uncanny regularity. Still, she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him. The memories rushed back, the circumstances of his birth, the decisions she had made, the mistakes, the regrets. There had been pain, secrecy, and ultimately, loss. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, demanding acknowledgement, demanding justice, demanding property. For a long moment, Monica could not move. Her mind swirled with fragmented images of the past, but the present demanded her attention. The family looked to her for answers, for guidance, for some form of explanation. Her son's gaze never wavered, filled with both accusation and yearning. He was not merely a stranger, he was a living reminder of everything Monica had lost, everything she had tried to forget, and everything she might still hope to reclaim. But his sudden insistence on dividing the estate complicated matters in a way that felt almost unbearable. This wasn't just about family. This was about power, legacy, and wealth, the very foundation of the Quartermaine name. As the tension mounted, Tracy was the first to lash out, demanding proof. She accused the man of being an opportunist, someone who had learned of the family's wealth and decided to take advantage of their grief. Others chimed in, some cautiously skeptical, others curious. Brooke Lynn whispered to Ned, wondering aloud if DNA tests would settle this. Monica, however, felt paralyzed. Her heart told her the man was her son. Her memories confirmed it. Yet, her mind warned her to tread carefully, to protect herself and the family legacy. She could feel Alan's presence in her heart, urging her to stay strong, reminding her that the Quartermaines had faced countless upheavals before. But this was deeply personal. The man's name, he revealed, was David. His voice carried a firmness that suggested he had rehearsed this moment countless times. He spoke of his childhood, of the hardships he endured, of the lingering bitterness of growing up without knowing his true roots. He said he had pieced together fragments of his past, and when he learned about Monica, everything clicked into place. The revelation that the woman who gave birth to him was a Quartermaine had fueled his determination to reclaim not only his identity but also what he believed was his rightful share of the family fortune. His words cut deep, not only for Monica but for everyone gathered. The room that should have been filled with mourning now simmered with conflict, suspicion, and fear of what this revelation meant for the Quartermaine dynasty. Monica struggled to hold herself together, her emotions threatening to spill over. She wanted to embrace him, to welcome him, to fill the void that had haunted her heart for so many years. Yet the way he stood before her, demanding, cold, insistent on property and inheritance, made it difficult to see the vulnerable child she once lost. She asked herself silently whether this was truly about family, or whether David had been hardened by years of resentment and survival, now viewing the Quartermaines not as a family to belong to, but as a fortune to claim. Still, her maternal instincts tugged at her fiercely, and despite the pain, she longed for reconciliation. The mourners shifted uncomfortably, some murmuring their support for Monica, others siding with Tracy's skepticism. Tension threatened to boil over, and Monica realized she had to speak. Her voice trembled but carried the strength of a woman who had weathered storms her entire life. She acknowledged David as her son but insisted that his demands for property could not overshadow the need for truth and healing. It wasn't about dividing the estate, she told him, it was about finding a way to rebuild the bond that had been broken for decades. But David's hardened expression suggested he wasn't ready to let go of his anger so easily. The somber, hushed atmosphere of the grand funeral parlor was a testament to the life of Edward Grayson Hartford. The air, thick with the cloying scent of lilies and expensive perfume, seemed to absorb the muted sobs and whispered condolences. Photographs of Edward, from a dashing young entrepreneur to a silver-haired patriarch, were displayed with tasteful reverence. In the front row, Monica Hartford, the widow, sat as still as a marble statue. Her black veil did little to conceal the profound emptiness in her eyes, a void carved out by equal parts grief and the sheer exhaustion of enduring a marriage that had long since become a gilded cage. Her son, Gabriel, sat protectively beside her, his jaw clenched, his hand covering hers in a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. He was the heir, the dutiful son who had stayed, and the entire room knew it. The eulogies had been a predictable parade of business associates and distant relatives, each painting a portrait of Edward as a titan of industry, a visionary. The air in the mansion felt thick, every breath weighted with uncertainty as Monica locked eyes with David. She could sense the years of anger simmering behind his expression, the walls he had built to protect himself from disappointment, rejection, and loss. Yet beneath all of that, she thought she saw something fragile, a flicker of longing, a hunger for belonging. It was that flicker that kept her rooted to the spot, even as the others grew restless. Tracy, impatient as always, demanded to know why this confrontation had to happen here, at a funeral, when emotions were already so raw. But David countered sharply, insisting that funerals marked both endings and beginnings. For him, this was the moment to step into his rightful place, and he wasn't going to wait a day longer. Brooklyn, ever the observer, tried to steady the room by asking the obvious question, if David was truly Monica's son, wouldn't he want to prove it? Her voice, though calm, carried suspicion. Michael crossed his arms, keeping quiet but studying David closely, as though he were trying to read whether his claims were genuine or carefully constructed lies. Ned, on the other hand, couldn't hide his agitation. He had spent his entire life fighting over Quartermaine wealth, clawing through battles of wills, estates, and boardroom wars. The thought of yet another challenger, especially one appearing so suddenly, was enough to make his jaw clench in frustration. Monica felt her heart aching as the family she loved splintered in front of her eyes. She had dreamed, in some distant corner of her mind, that if she ever saw her lost child again, it would be a moment of reconciliation, a bridge built over years of regret. Instead, it felt more like a court trial, with every pair of eyes demanding proof, demanding answers, demanding some kind of closure that would never come easily. She finally asked David the question that had haunted her since he walked in, why now? Why choose this moment, in the midst of grief, to reappear? David's face hardened, his voice sharp as he explained that he had waited long enough. He had lived too many years in the shadows, too many years denied the truth of his birthright. When he learned of the funeral, he realized the entire family would be gathered here, and he wouldn't have to face them one by one. To him, it was the perfect moment, not to exploit grief, but to finally reveal himself. Yet the timing still stung Monica. It felt like a cruel collision of past wounds and present pain. The tension escalated when Tracy demanded he leave until he could prove his story. She sneered at him, reminding the room of the endless parade of imposters and schemers who had targeted the Quartermaines over the years. "We're not fools," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "If you think you can stroll in here, toss out a story, and walk away with a piece of this family's fortune, you're sorely mistaken." But David didn't back down. His tone grew sharper, colder, as he declared that he didn't need Tracy's approval. He wasn't there to win hearts, he was there to claim what was his. Monica felt torn in two. Her instincts as a mother pulled her toward David, pleading silently for patience, compassion, and time. But the fierceness in his voice unsettled her, as though the years apart had not only separated them but hardened him into someone she struggled to recognize. Her emotions threatened to overwhelm her, and for a moment, she retreated inward, thinking of Alan. She imagined what he might say if he were standing beside her. He would want her to be cautious but also compassionate. He would remind her that love was the glue that held families together, even when the fractures seemed irreparable. That thought gave her strength to speak again. Her voice quivered but grew steady as she told David she was willing to undergo DNA testing to prove their bond. The family murmured among themselves, some relieved by her practicality, others still suspicious. David smirked, almost as if he expected resistance but welcomed the challenge. He agreed without hesitation, promising that once the truth was undeniable, the Quartermaines would have no choice but to accept him. The way he emphasized the word accept made Monica shiver, not because she doubted their connection, but because it felt like acceptance, to him, meant wealth and recognition rather than love. In the midst of the standoff, Olivia tried to interject with reason, suggesting that emotions were too high for the matter to be discussed further at the funeral. Her voice of reason carried weight, but David refused to be silenced. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the portraits that lined the mansion walls, images of Quartermaine's past, each one a reminder of the wealth and legacy he believed he had been denied. His gaze returned to Monica, sharp yet vulnerable. "I grew up with nothing," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You had everything. And now, I won't let you or anyone else keep it from me again." The room fell silent. Monica felt those words pierce her, dragging guilt to the surface. She had been forced to make choices long ago that separated her from her son. Some were choices she regretted every day. But his words made her wonder if he would ever see her as more than a woman who had wronged him. Would he ever look at her as a mother who had grieved his absence? Or would he forever see her as a gatekeeper to wealth and power? As the silence lingered, Jason's absence loomed large in Monica's heart. He had always been her rock, the son who had challenged her but also softened her. She wondered what he would say if he were alive to witness this moment. Would he see David as a brother worth fighting for, or as a threat to the family's stability? The thought made her chest ache, the weight of loss colliding with the uncertainty of this new revelation. Finally, Monica drew a deep breath and told David that while proof would settle the question of blood, it would not mend the decades of separation or ease the bitterness in his heart. If he truly wanted to be part of the Quartermaine family, he would have to do more than demand an inheritance. He would have to open himself to healing, to trust, to the possibility of love. Her words hung in the air, trembling with sincerity. But David's expression didn't soften. Instead, it grew even more guarded, as though her plea had only deepened the wall between them. The hours after the funeral felt endless, the mansion buzzing with hushed arguments and sideways glances as everyone tried to make sense of David's sudden arrival. The Quartermaines had never been strangers to chaos, but this particular storm carried a different weight. It wasn't just another con artist or outsider, but someone tied by blood, someone who could permanently alter the family dynamic. Monica sat quietly in the drawing room, her fingers pressed against her temple as if she could hold back the pounding ache in her head. For years she had carried the ache of loss, the unanswered questions, the longing for the child who had been taken from her. And now, here he was, standing across the hall, demanding recognition yet showing no warmth. David remained on edge, pacing near the window while sipping a glass of water Olivia had offered him. He looked out into the garden, his jaw tightening as though the beauty of the Quartermaine estate only fueled his bitterness. Brooklyn lingered near the doorway, whispering with Ned, who was convinced David's reappearance had less to do with family and everything to do with the company shares and inheritance. Tracy, meanwhile, was in the corner, arms crossed, muttering to herself about frauds and opportunists. Her cynicism was sharp, but Monica knew Tracy's distress wasn't entirely misplaced. Over the years, so many had tried to worm their way into the Quartermaine fortune. But this was different. Monica could feel it in her bones. She could see Alan's eyes in David's face, hear faint echoes of herself in his cadence. There was no denying the bond, though the coldness in his manner made her stomach twist with dread. When Olivia gently suggested the conversation be postponed until DNA results could provide clarity, David snapped. His voice rose, cutting through the mansion like a blade. I don't need to wait for science to tell me who I am. I know where I come from, and I know what I deserve. His declaration left the room frozen, the weight of his bitterness pressing on everyone. Monica finally stood, her shoulders squared despite the weariness that threatened to drag her down. She told David that while his words might be filled with certainty, trust had to be earned. The family had been burned too many times, and she wasn't about to let history repeat itself. She suggested a DNA test again, her tone firmer this time, not as a question but as a necessity. David's lips pressed into a thin line before he gave a small nod, clearly reluctant but unwilling to lose ground. Fine, he said. Do your test. But when it proves what I already know, don't think you can keep me from what's mine. The room shifted again, filled with murmurs, discomfort, and unspoken fears. Michael, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke, his voice steady but measured. He reminded David that being a Quartermaine wasn't about money alone, it was about surviving the family battles, navigating loyalty, betrayal, and complicated love. His words were sincere, but David dismissed them with a scoff, as though Michael's attempt at reason was nothing more than condescension. Monica's heart ached. She had hoped that once David revealed himself, there might be a spark of connection, a doorway to healing. Instead, every word seemed to build walls higher between him and the rest of the family. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left and the house had quieted, Monica found herself alone with David in the study. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering light across the room. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and unyielding. Finally, Monica spoke, her voice softer now, stripped of the composure she had shown earlier. I never stopped thinking about you, she whispered, her eyes glistening. Not a single day went by that I didn't wonder where you were, if you were safe, if you were happy. I wanted to find you, but life, circumstances, they kept us apart. David's jaw tightened as he turned to face her, his eyes flashing with anger. Safe? Happy? Do you have any idea what my life was like? While you lived here, surrounded by wealth, servants, and family portraits, I was struggling just to get by. I had no one, Monica. No one. And now you want me to believe you cared? His words were harsh, slicing into Monica's heart, but she didn't flinch. She knew she had to endure his anger, to let him release years of pain before healing could even begin. Her eyes filled with tears as she told him she had made mistakes, choices she regretted, choices that haunted her every day. She hadn't been able to raise him, hadn't been able to give him the life he deserved, and for that, she would always carry guilt. But she insisted her love was real, even if it had been forced to remain silent. David looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. For the first time that day, the hardness in his gaze wavered, replaced by something raw, hurt, longing, vulnerability. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced once again by anger and guardedness. Tracy's sudden entrance shattered the moment. She barged into the study, declaring that the family lawyer had already been contacted and that no claims would be entertained until the DNA results were back. Her tone was icy, her words calculated to keep David on edge. Monica shot her a warning look, but it was too late, the damage had been done. David's face hardened again, his fists clenching at his sides. You think you can push me away, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But you'll see. You'll all see. I'm not leaving, and I'm not backing down. With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving Monica torn between reaching out to him and collapsing under the weight of everything that had just unfolded. Alone once again, Monica sank into a chair by the fire. She pressed her fingers against her eyes, willing herself not to break down completely. The grief of the funeral had already been heavy, but now it mingled with fresh pain, raw confusion, and a fear she could hardly name. She wanted desperately to believe there was hope for reconciliation, that her son's anger was only a mask for deeper wounds. But the way he spoke of the inheritance, of what he was owed, made her wonder if there was still room for love beneath all that resentment. The flames in the fireplace crackled, their warmth a small comfort in the cold storm that had engulfed the Quartermain family once again. Days passed in uneasy silence as the Quartermains waited for the DNA test results. The mansion felt like a pressure cooker, everyone going about their daily routines while keeping one eye on the storm that lingered in the background. Monica found herself staring out the window often, watching the garden but seeing only flashes of the past, memories of holding her son as a baby, the agonizing moment when she lost him, and the crushing fear that she had no chance to make things right. Now that he was back, she wanted to cling to hope, but his demands for property made her wonder if reconciliation was even possible. David remained in Port Charles, refusing to disappear. He stayed at a modest hotel, avoiding the family's offers, or rather, Tracy's insistence, that he leave town until things were settled. His presence lingered like a shadow, and though he wasn't under the Quartermain roof, his words echoed in every room. Ned worried about the corporate angle, muttering about shares and stocks, while Brooklyn found herself curiously conflicted. Part of her felt sympathy for David, what if he really had been robbed of a family? But another part warned her not to let sentiment cloud judgment. Tracy, of course, made no secret of her disdain, convinced David was after nothing more than money. Finally, the envelope arrived. The courier handed it over with a kind of formality that only deepened the tension. Monica held the paper in her trembling hands, every second stretching into eternity as the family gathered in the drawing room. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of the envelope as she carefully tore it open. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the words that would change everything. Her breath caught in her throat. The test was conclusive. David was indeed her biological son. A wave of shock swept through the room, even though part of them had already suspected the truth. Monica's knees nearly buckled, and she gripped the back of a chair for support. Tears filled her eyes, not just from relief but from the overwhelming flood of emotions that accompanied confirmation. For years, she had lived with the emptiness of losing him, and now science had confirmed what her heart already knew. He was hers. He was Alan's. He was a Quartermain. But if Monica's heart soared with bittersweet joy, the rest of the family's reaction was far more complicated. Tracy immediately bristled, declaring that blood alone did not make him a Quartermain. She pointed out that plenty of people had been family by name but enemies in practice. Her words cut sharply, reminding everyone of the betrayals and schemes that had plagued the Quartermains over the years. Ned looked worried, already envisioning boardroom battles and divided shares. Michael folded his arms, quietly absorbing the news but cautious about where it would lead. David, meanwhile, stood tall, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. He glanced around the room as though daring anyone to challenge him now. "You see," he said, his voice edged with both pride and resentment. "I told you. I belong here. This is my family. This," he gestured broadly toward the mansion, the portraits, the wealth that surrounded them, "this is mine, too." His words made Monica's heart sink. She wanted so badly to hear him say he wanted her, that he longed for connection, that he hungered for love. Instead, all she heard was possession, entitlement, the language of someone who had been hardened by years of scarcity and anger. She stepped forward, her voice trembling as she tried to reach him. "Yes, you are my son. That's the truth, and nothing can ever take that away. But being a Quartermain isn't about houses and money. It's about family. It's about surviving together, through pain and joy, through mistakes and forgiveness. I want you here, David. I want to know you, not fight with you. Please, don't let this be about property. Let it be about us." Her plea hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. For a moment, David's face softened, a flicker of something vulnerable crossing his features. But just as quickly, his expression hardened again. He shook his head, his voice sharp. "Easy for you to say. You had everything. You grew up with this house, this family, this legacy. I had nothing. You talk about love and forgiveness, but love didn't feed me. Forgiveness didn't keep me warm at night. All those years, I was struggling while you were living in luxury. Now it's my turn. I deserve what was denied me. Tracy seized on his words immediately, scoffing as she accused him of confirming her suspicions. There it is, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. It's not about family. It's about greed. You want a piece of the pie, and you think DNA gives you the right. But guess what? We've fought off plenty of so-called heirs before, and we'll fight you, too. Her voice was icy, her stance firm, and though Monica wanted to silence her, part of her feared Tracy wasn't entirely wrong. The argument escalated, voices clashing as the Quartermaines did what they did best, fight. Brooke Lynn tried to mediate, urging everyone to calm down, but her voice was drowned out. Ned warned that David's claim could create chaos at ELQ, Michael pointed out that dragging the battle into the corporate world would only deepen the rift, and Olivia pleaded for cooler heads to prevail. Through it all, Monica stood in the center, torn between her desire to embrace her son and her fear that his anger would destroy what little chance they had at a future together. When the shouting finally subsided, Monica turned to David, her voice soft but steady. I can't change the past. I can't undo the years we lost, or the pain you went through. But I can try to make things right now. I want you to be part of this family, not as someone demanding property, but as my son. That's what matters to me. That's what I want. Her eyes shone with tears, her words trembling with hope. David looked at her for a long, silent moment. Something in his gaze wavered, but then he straightened, his expression guarded once more. We'll see, he said quietly, his tone carrying both promise and warning. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the family in uneasy silence once again. Monica watched him go, her heart torn open, wondering if she had just regained her son, or if she was on the brink of losing him all over again. The mansion had fallen into a tense quiet after David's dramatic exit, but the silence was fragile, masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. Monica sat alone in the living room, staring at Alan's portrait, seeking strength from the memory of the man who had always anchored her through chaos. What would you do, Alan? She whispered, her voice breaking. Would you welcome him without hesitation? Or would you be as cautious as the others? She wanted to believe Alan's heart would have been open, but she also knew he would have been fiercely protective of their legacy. Over the next few days, David made his presence in Port Charles impossible to ignore. He visited lawyers, he asked questions about the Quartermaine fortune, and he even dropped in at ELQ headquarters, demanding to meet with the board. Ned was livid, his voice echoing through the mansion as he ranted about David being a threat to everything the family had built. Tracy, of course, was even more ruthless, calling him a parasite who had latched onto the Quartermaine name the moment he saw a way in.